Lieutenant Commander Jason Reed was the ocean. That was the first thing people noticed about him, the thing that filled a room before he even opened his mouth. He moved with the easy, rolling gait of a man who had spent 15 years on the decks of destroyers and carriers, a man for whom the pitch and yaw of a ship was the natural state of the world. He had the kind of quiet, an unshakable confidence that came from surviving things most people couldn't imagine. Night landings on a pitching deck in the middle of the ocean, the weight of a multi-million-dollar aircraft on his shoulders, the lives of a dozen men in his hands. At 42, he was a Mustang, an officer who had risen from the enlisted ranks, and he wore his hard-won authority like a second skin. His world was one of crisp salutes, unequivocal orders, and a chain of command as solid and immovable as a bulkhead. That's why the woman on the USS Independence irritated him from the very first moment he saw her. It was a Tuesday, 3 days into a routine transit from Norfolk to a deployment in the Med. The hangar bay was a controlled chaos of maintenance, the air thick with the smell of JP-5 jet fuel and hydraulic fluid. Reed was running a pre-evolution brief with his V-1 division, the group of 18 to 22-year-olds who snapped to attention the moment his shadow fell across the deck plates. And there, standing 10 feet away, leaning against the catwalk ladder with a tablet in her hand, was a woman who looked as out of place as a fish in a tree. She was probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She wore the standard Navy-issued coveralls, but they fit her too well, like she'd had them tailored. She wasn't part of his division, not part of any division he recognized. She wasn't doing anything overtly wrong. She was just watching. Her eyes, a calm, unflinching gray, moved from face to face, lingering on his sailors, scanning the aircraft, noting the positions of the safety observers. It wasn't the curious gaze of a visiting dignitary or the bored stare of someone waiting for maintenance. It was the cold, analytical assessment of someone cataloging information. Reed finished his brief. "Now, all right, let's get to it. O'Malley, you're on hydraulic pressure checks. Sing, with me on the pre-flight of the 511. As his team dispersed, Reed walked over to the woman. He wasn't one for subtlety. The ocean didn't do subtle. It did direct, powerful, and undeniable. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that cut through the ambient noise. She looked up from her tablet, her expression perfectly neutral. There was no fluster, no apology in her eyes, and just that same calm assessment, now directed at him. "No, sir. I'm exactly where I need to be." Reed waited for more. An explanation, a badge, and "I'm with the Admiral's staff." He got nothing. Just a closed-lip, patient smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is a controlled maintenance area," he pressed, his tone hardening just a fraction. "Unless you have a specific reason to be in my hangar bay, I need you to clear the deck." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I have a reason, Lieutenant Commander." "Don't worry, I won't get in anyone's way, I'm just observing." Observing. The word grated on him. This was his kingdom. Every bolt on every F/A-18 in this bay was his responsibility. Every sailor under his charge was his to lead and protect. He didn't need some random civilian or admin pogue or whoever she was, just observing and getting underfoot. "Observing what exactly?" he pressed, stepping a little closer. The move was meant to be intimidating, a subtle reminder of the physical space he commanded. She didn't flinch. If anything, the slight curve of her lips widened by a millimeter. Processes, people, the way things work. Her gaze flicked past him to where Petty Officer O'Malley was hooking up a pressure gauge. "For example, that hydraulic check you just ordered. He'll skip step 4 in the manual, the one about purging the secondary line. He's done it 1,000 times and thinks he knows better. He's probably right, on 99% of the time. But that 1% is a hell of a way to lose an aircraft." Reed froze. He turned to look at O'Malley, who was indeed moving with the efficient, slightly short-cutting confidence of a seasoned mechanic. The woman was right. It was a shortcut he himself sometimes tacitly allowed to save time, a calculated risk based on the sailor's expertise. But for her to not only know the manual, but to spot the deviation from 30 feet away. He turned back, so his irritation now laced with a thread of something else. Wariness. "Who the hell are you?" "My name is Eleanor Vance," she said simply, and offered no more. That was it. For the next 3 days, she was a ghost in his world. She'd appear in the most unexpected places. During a night ops briefing in the wardroom, she'd be in the back, silently taking notes on a steno pad. During a tense refueling evolution on the flight deck, buffeted by jet wash and deafening noise, he'd catch a glimpse of her standing by a catwalk, her dark hair whipping around her face, utterly unbothered by the chaos. He tried to ignore her, to focus on his job, but she was a splinter under his skin. He'd make a joke during a maintenance meeting, and his guys would laugh, but he'd see her in the corner, not laughing, just writing. He'd tear a strip off a junior officer for a sloppy report, and he could almost feel her analytical gaze on his back, judging his methods. It was infuriating. One evening, he found her in the ship's small library, a quiet room usually populated by sailors cramming for advancement exams. She was hunched over a stack of maintenance logs, her brow furrowed in concentration. He couldn't help himself. He walked over. Still observing? She looked up, and for a split second he saw a flicker of something behind the gray eyes. Exhaustion, maybe, or deep focus being broken. Still observing? Lieutenant Commander. He gestured to the logs. "Those are 5 years old. Classified. What possible interest could they hold for you?" "You'd be surprised what patterns you can find in old data," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "A discrepancy here, a part failure there. A string of minor incidents that on their own mean nothing. But when you connect the dots..." Reed leaned against the door frame. He was a problem solver by nature. It was his job. Connect them to what? She closed the logbook, her movements deliberate. "To a broader picture. Let me ask you a question, sir. Do you trust your supply chain?" The question was so out of left field it took him a second. "My supply chain? The parts that keep my birds flying? Yeah, I trust it. It's the Navy. It's bureaucratic and slow, but it's solid." "Is it?" she asked, the question hanging in the air. "Well, what if a specific type of actuator for the FA-18's flight control system has a failure rate that's 3 times the statistical norm, but only on aircraft operating out of Norfolk? What would you make of that?" Reed's mind, trained for years in risk assessment, started churning. "I'd look at the maintenance crew, the environmental conditions in Norfolk, the specific batch numbers." "I've already done that," she said, cutting him off, not rudely, but with finality. "The crews are fine. It's the conditions are fine. The batch numbers are all over the place, but the common denominator is the supplier, a company called Trident Maritime Solutions. They won the contract for those actuators 18 months ago. Low bid." Reed knew the name. Everyone in naval aviation knew the name. They were a massive, seemingly untouchable defense contractor. "TMS? They're one of the biggest. They build half the electronics on this ship." "Big doesn't mean honest," Eleanor said softly. She stood up, tucking her notebook into her pocket. "And a pattern of failures, even minor ones, that don't get flagged up the chain because they're just written off as routine maintenance. That's a good way to hide a design flaw, or a cheaper substandard part." Reed stared at her, the pieces clicking into place with an almost audible snap. This wasn't an efficiency expert. This wasn't a journalist. This was something else entirely. The calmness, the access, the way she looked at people not as sailors, but as data points, the probing questions that cut to the heart of operational security. "You're not Navy," he said, the realization dawning. "No," she agreed. "You're some kind of investigator?" She smiled, that same closed-lipped smile, but this time there was a hint of genuine amusement in it. "Something like that. Good night, Lieutenant Commander. Don't let me keep you from your duties." And just like that, she was gone, leaving him standing alone in the silent library, his certainties about his orderly world beginning to fracture. The following afternoon, the easy rhythm of Reed's existence was shattered entirely. He was in his stateroom, catching up on paperwork, when the 1MC squawked to life. "Lieutenant Commander Reed, please report to the Admiral's in-port cabin." Lieutenant Commander Reed lay to the Admiral's cabin. His stomach did a little flip. The Admiral. You didn't get summoned by the Admiral for a good conduct medal. He straightened his coveralls, checked his appearance in the small mirror, and made his way through the labyrinthine passageways of the ship. He knocked on the doorframe of the Admiral's cabin. "Lieutenant Commander Reed reporting as ordered." "Enter," came the gruff voice. Inside, the cabin was cramped but organized. Rear Admiral Hollis, a weathered man with a buzz cut and eyes that had seen too much, was seated behind a small desk. And standing by the single porthole, yet looking out at the gray Atlantic, was Eleanor Vance. She had shed the coveralls and was wearing a simple dark blue blazer and slacks. She looked different, more formal, more official. "Reed," the Admiral said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit down." Reed sat, his eyes darting between the Admiral and the woman. "Commander Reed," Eleanor said, turning from the window. Her voice was different now, too. The quiet observer was gone. In her place was a woman of quiet, undeniable authority. "I owe you an apology. My lack of introduction was deliberate, but perhaps discourteous. Let me properly introduce myself. I am Special Agent Eleanor Vance with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'm the lead investigator on a joint task force looking into systemic fraud and corruption within the Department of Defense supply chain." Reed felt the blood drain from his face. The FBI. On his ship. For months. The irritation. And the jokes to his fellow officers about the weird woman from admin, the dismissive comments he'd made in the wardroom, they all came crashing back with the force of a tidal wave. Hollis leaned forward, his expression grim. "For the last 14 months, Special Agent Vance and her team have been building a case against Trident Maritime Solutions and several individuals within the procurement chain for knowingly supplying faulty parts, falsifying safety tests, and bribing officials to look the other way. The faulty actuator she mentioned? That's not a hypothetical. We've traced 3 minor incidents to that part. If one of those had failed at a critical moment, during a combat sortie, during a carrier landing, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd be writing letters to families." Reed's mind was reeling. The low-level thrum of the ship's engines seemed to grow louder in his ears. He thought of O'Malley, Singh, all his guys. They were trusting their lives to parts that might be built to fail. "Why am I here, sir?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Eleanor Vance walked over and sat on the edge of the Admiral's desk, facing him. "Because, Commander, your division is ground zero. The aircraft you maintain have been the primary recipients of the faulty parts from TMS. The maintenance records you sign off on are the evidence we need to prove a pattern of failure. And," she paused, her gray eyes locking onto his, "we believe someone in your division, or with access to your hangar bay, is being paid to look the other way, to not report certain failures, to lose certain paperwork." The accusation hung in the air like a physical weight. "That's impossible," Reed said, the words out before he could stop them. "My people. I know my people. They're the best. They're loyal." "They're human, Commander," Eleanor said, her voice soft but unyielding. And humans have prices, a gambling debt, a sick parent, a desire for a better life.